The Galactic Research Institute's pristine white halls buzzed with an unusual energy that morning. Through the massive observation windows that lined the circular facility, 3 suns cast their purple and orange glow across the polished floors, creating an ever-shifting pattern of light that would have mesmerized any first-time visitor. But Dr. Nix Solara barely noticed as she speed-walked toward the emergency meeting, her forearms simultaneously adjusting her lab coat, checking her data pad, straightening her neural interface crown, and swiping through security clearances. "This better be worth interrupting my quantum consciousness experiment," she muttered to herself, her secondary voice box producing a low harmonic grumble that caused several junior researchers to scatter from her path. The doors to Conference Room Alpha slid open with a satisfying whoosh, revealing a scene of barely contained chaos. Professor Orion Lightcaster stood at the head of the floating conference table, all 6 of her bioluminescent appendages glowing with excitement as she gestured at the holographic display. Director Zenith Crystallis sat in his usual spot, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated severe agitation. Research Assistant Vex Nebula was practically bouncing off the gravity-adjusted ceiling. "Ah, Dr. Bloom, thank the 7 moons you're here." Lumi's voice chimed like wind through crystal. "You won't believe what our long-range sensors picked up from that insignificant little yellow star system we've been monitoring." Azurix settled into her ergonomically designed hover chair, allowing her neural crown to sync with the room's systems. "The Sol system, that backwater, I thought we classified it as another dead end last cycle." "Dead end?" Hopixel exclaimed, finally managing to stabilize their anti-gravity boots. "More like we completely misunderstood everything about it." "Show her, Professor." The holographic display expanded, filling the room with a 3-dimensional model of the 3rd planet from Sol. Data streams scrolled through the air, numbers and calculations that made absolutely no sense together. "These readings have to be wrong," Azurix stated flatly, her secondary arms crossing in a gesture of scientific skepticism. "You're telling me there are sentient beings on this planet who can survive in temperature ranges of -50 to +50 degrees, who voluntarily expose themselves to dihydrogen monoxide in its liquid form for recreation, who continue functioning without rest for over 24 planetary rotations when necessary." Director Sparkforge's crystalline surface rippled with concern. "We've triple-checked the data, Bloom. There's a species there that doesn't just survive these conditions, they thrive in them. They call themselves humans." The word hung in the air like a mathematical impossibility. Azurix's neural crown processed the incoming data streams faster, searching for the error that had to be there. But the gravity alone should make complex tool use impossible, not to mention the atmospheric pressure variations, the background radiation levels, the biological requirements for handling multiple types of organic fuel sources. "That's just it." Lumi's appendages pulsed with academic excitement. "They shouldn't exist. By every model we've developed over the last 1,000 cycles, they're a statistical impossibility. Yet there they are, building primitive space vessels, splitting atoms for energy, and something they call competitive eating contests." Azurix felt a headache forming in all 3 of her brain clusters. "We need to study them properly up close." "Already ahead of you," Director Sparkforge chimed in, his surface now showing patterns of administrative satisfaction. "We've received approval from the Galactic Council for a detailed research project. We're authorized to make contact and bring 1 specimen here for controlled observation." "1 specimen?" Pixel asked, their chromatophores shifting to a concerned shade of mauve. "Is that safe, given what we've observed of their capabilities?" Azurix's primary mouth curved into what her species considered a smile. "Safe? No, but neither is ignoring a species that breaks every rule we thought we understood about biological life. We need to know how they do it, why they do it, and most importantly, double quote, she paused, all for hands spreading wide in a gesture of scientific wonder. Double quotes, what other impossibilities they might be capable of. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of data streams and the gentle crystal untinkling of Director Sparkforge's thoughtful shifting. They all knew they were standing on the brink of something unprecedented, something that would either revolutionize their understanding of the universe or possibly blow up in their faces, quite possibly both. The observation deck of Research Station 7 hummed with activity as Dr. Nix Solara and her team watched the high-resolution feeds from Earth. Professor Orion Lightcaster's bioluminescent appendages cast shifting patterns across the walls as she coordinated multiple data streams simultaneously. "Look at this one," Lumi announced, bringing up a video feed of a human settlement near something they called the Rocky Mountains. They're deliberately climbing vertical rock formations for entertainment. Their vital signs should be showing extreme stress, but their brain chemistry indicates pleasure. Azurix adjusted her neural crown, focusing on the biometric data. "Send that to my personal archive and bring up the Antarctic Research Station feeds again." The screen shifted to show humans moving about in conditions that would flash freeze most known sentient species. They wore what appeared to be simple insulated coverings, yet maintained full mobility and cognitive function. "I still can't believe they just walk around in that," Research Assistant Pixel commented, their chromatophores flickering between amazement and disbelief. 40 degrees, and they're having something called a snowball fight. Speaking of fights, Director Sparkforge chimed in, his crystalline form resonating with curiosity. "Show them the combat sports data, Professor." Lumi's appendages danced across the control interface, pulling up new footage. These humans deliberately engage in recreational combat. They strike each other with force sufficient to break bones, yet they recover and voluntarily return for more. "Look at these injury recovery rates," Azurix muttered, her four hands scrolling through medical data. "Broken bones knit themselves back together. Damaged tissue regenerates. They can lose up to 60% of their blood volume and survive. It's like their bodies simply refuse to accept failure as an option." The team watched in fascinated silence as more data poured in. Humans running for days without rest in something called ultramarathons. Humans diving to crushing depths with minimal protection. Humans intentionally exposing themselves to extreme heat in saunas for relaxation. "But this," Lumi said, her voice dropping to an impressed whisper, "this is what really got the Galactic Council's attention." The main screen filled with footage from various emergency situations. Humans lifting crushed vehicles to save others. Humans running into burning buildings. Humans performing emergency medical procedures on themselves. They exceed their normal physical limitations in crisis situations, Azurix observed, her secondary voice box humming with scientific excitement. "Some kind of emergency response system we've never seen before. The phenomenon they call adrenaline only partially explains it." Pixel pulled up another dataset. "And look at their adaptability. They can survive on almost any organic matter as fuel. Their digestive systems process substances that would be toxic to most species. They actively seek out chemicals that cause mild poisoning for pleasure. They call it spicy food." Director Sparkforge's surface rippled with concern. "The Council wants to know if they pose a threat. A species this resilient, this adaptable, no clear signs of expansionist tendencies," Lumi interrupted, her appendages glowing reassuringly. "They seem more focused on competing with themselves than others, though their entertainment media suggests they constantly contemplate scenarios of interstellar conflict." Azurix brought up a new series of readings. "Their most remarkable feature might be their psychological resilience. Look at this data on their response to setbacks and failures." The screens filled with examples. Athletes recovering from career-ending injuries to compete again. Students retaking failed tests dozens of times until passing. Entrepreneurs starting new ventures after multiple bankruptcies. "They just keep trying," Pixel observed, their chromatophores shifting to a shade of wondering blue, "even when success seems statistically impossible." "Exactly," Azurix said, all four arms gesturing excitedly. "They've made an art form of defying probability. Their entire history is a sequence of doing things they technically shouldn't be able to do." "Which brings us to the real question," Director Sparkforge intoned, his crystalline form catching the light dramatically. "How do we study a species that routinely accomplishes the impossible?" Lumi's appendages pulsed with sudden inspiration. We need to think like them, do something that seems scientifically inadvisable. She paused, building dramatic tension. We need to bring one here. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their containment systems were designed for known life forms operating within understood parameters. A human would be something else entirely. I'll begin reviewing potential candidates, Azurix declared, her secondary voice box already calculating probabilities. We need someone physically active enough to demonstrate their capabilities, but not so exceptional that they skew the baseline data. And someone who won't panic when they suddenly find themselves in an alien research facility. Pixel added, their color shifting to a thoughtful green. Director Sparkforge's surface showed patterns of reluctant agreement. The council has approved the plan, but they want multiple fail-safes. If we do this, we need to be prepared for anything. Prepared for anything? Lumi chimed in, her bioluminescence flickering with amusement. Director, based on everything we've observed, I don't think that's possible. These humans, they specialize in the unexpected. Azurix found herself making the gesture of scientific satisfaction again. Then we'll just have to do what they do best, attempt something impossibly difficult, and somehow make it work. The team turned back to their screens, each lost in thoughts about the remarkable creatures they were about to study up close. None of them suspected just how right Lumi's words would prove to be. Security Officer Kale Iridium stood in front of the assembled research team, her protective scales glowing with professional concern. Let me get this straight. You want to bring an actual human into our most advanced research facility, and your whole safety protocol is extra reinforced containment fields. And really polite requests, Pixel added helpfully, their chromatophores shifting to an optimistic yellow. Dr. Nix Solara pulled up the selected candidate's profile on the main display. Everyone, meet Ryan Carter, 32 Earth years old. Amateur marathon runner, works in something they call software sales. Perfect combination of above-average physical condition without being exceptional by human standards. The holographic display showed a brown-haired human male jogging through what humans called a park, completely unaware of the alien surveillance drones recording his every move. Biometric data scrolled alongside the image: height, weight, average running speed, caffeine consumption levels. Look at his endurance stats, Lumi commented, her appendages twirling with excitement. Last week he ran 42 kilometers just for fun, then went to work the next day like it was nothing. Director Sparkforge's crystalline surface showed patterns of administrative concern. What about psychological stability? Social media analysis shows normal human behavior patterns. Azurix responded, pulling up more data streams. Regular contact with family members, moderate participation in recreational activities, only occasional outbursts during something called fantasy football season. Nova flicked her tail skeptically. And how exactly do we plan to get him here? Please tell me we're not using the traditional abduction beam. Of course not. Pixel chimed in, their color rippling with amusement. We're using the new quantum displacement field. Much more comfortable. He'll hardly notice the difference between that and his morning coffee jitters. The team spent the next 3 hours reviewing safety protocols. Nova insisted on installing 17 different types of containment fields, 12 emergency teleporters, and what she called her last resort disintegration beam. Azurix pretended not to notice when she also added a personal force field generator to everyone's lab coats. Testing chamber preparations are complete, Lumi announced, her appendages glowing with pride as she displayed the renovated facility. We've adjusted the artificial gravity to match Earth conditions, replicated their atmospheric composition, and installed their preferred ambient temperature controls. What about the observation equipment? Director Sparkforge asked, his surface refracting light in patterns of scientific curiosity. Pixel brought up the specs, everything from standard biometric scanners to quantum state analyzers. We can track his cellular activity, brain patterns, emotional responses, and something humans call dad jokes, which we still don't quite understand, and the testing scenarios. Nova prompted, her scales shifting to a worried purple. Azurix took over the display, showing a series of carefully designed experiments. We'll start simple. Basic physical endurance tests, then gradually increase difficulty to observe their legendary adaptation capabilities, all within safe parameters, of course. Safe by whose standards? Nova muttered. The species that drinks liquid caffeine for breakfast. Speaking of sustenance, Lumi interjected, we've stocked the facility with appropriate human fuel sources, their preferred varieties of processed plant and animal matter, plus something called energy drinks, which according to our analysis, are basically liquid mathematics violations. Director Sparkforge's surface showed patterns indicating he was about to make an important announcement. The Galactic Council has given us final approval. Extraction team, are you ready? Through the COM link, the field operators confirmed their positions. They had been tracking Ryan Carter for weeks, learning his running routes, calculating the perfect moment for extraction. He was approaching his usual halfway point now in a secluded stretch of trail where he often stopped to take something humans called a selfie. Remember, Ezrix addressed the team one final time. We're making history here. First controlled observation of a human in a research environment. Everything we think we know about biological limitations could change after today, assuming he doesn't accidentally break reality just by being here. Pixel added cheerfully, earning a glare from Nova that made their chromatophores retreat to a nervous beige. Extraction team, you have authorization, Director Sparkforge announced. Bring us our human. On the monitor, they watched as Ryan Carter slowed to a stop, pulled out his communication device, and prepared to document his run. The quantum displacement field activated with a subtle shimmer of reality-bending energy. A moment later, the warning lights in the arrival chamber began flashing. The air crackled with displaced energy, and there, looking only mildly confused, stood Ryan Carter, still holding his phone in selfie position. Huh, he said, looking around at the distinctly alien facility. Either someone spiked my pre-workout or this is about to be a really interesting Thursday. The research team stared at their monitors in disbelief. According to every sensor, his vital signs had barely changed. He showed lower stress levels than most species did during their morning hygiene routines. Nova's scales shifted to emergency red. Did he just make a joke? Fascinating, Ezrix whispered, all for hands already taking notes. Subject displays immediate adaptive response to extreme situational change through humor. Beginning official observation log. None of them realized it yet, but Ryan Carter was about to redefine their understanding of not just human capabilities, but the very nature of possibility itself. Good morning, Greg. Did you sleep well? Dr. Nix Solara asked through the observation room's communication system. I noticed you only remained unconscious for approximately 7 hours, despite our facility offering optimal rest conditions. Ryan Carter stretched casually, wearing the specialized monitoring suit they provided. Actually slept great, though the anti-gravity kicked in during the night and I woke up floating. Made getting to the bathroom interesting. You mean you maintain bladder control even in zero gravity? Fascinating. Pixel's chromatophores flashed with excitement as they recorded the observation. Professor Orion Lightcaster's appendages dance across the control panel. Shall we begin today's tests? We've prepared what we believe humans call a warm-up session. Sure thing, Greg replied, jogging in place. Hit me with your best shot. Nova Brightscale's scales flickered in alarm. No one is hitting anyone. That wasn't in the approved protocol. It's just an expression, Nova, Ezrix explained, her secondary voice box humming with amusement. Initiating test sequence alpha. The testing chamber transformed around Greg. Treadmills appeared, environmental controls adjusted, and monitoring equipment hummed to life. What followed would forever change the research team's understanding of human capabilities. First came the endurance tests. They started Greg at what they considered a reasonable pace, only to watch him maintain it for hours while casually asking questions about alien sports. When they increased the gravity to 1.5 times Earth normal, he simply adjusted his running form and kept going. This cannot be correct, Director Sparkforge said, his crystalline surface showing patterns of disbelief. He's been running for 6 hours. His lactic acid levels should be ... so they're off the charts, Lumi interrupted, her appendages glowing with scientific excitement. But he's just ignoring them. Look at his neural patterns. He's actually thinking about what to have for dinner. Next came temperature resistance testing. They gradually adjusted the chamber's environment, expecting to find his limits. Instead, they found themselves recording increasingly bizarre observations. Subject maintains cognitive function at 40 degrees Celsius, Azurix noted. Currently solving complex mathematical equations while sweating profusely. Her secondary voice box made a sound of mild disgust. It's called math therapy, Greg called out between questions. Helps distract from the heat. Speaking of which, any chance I could get some water? Starting to feel a bit parched. Nova nearly had a seizure when Greg casually drank 3 liters of water in under a minute. That's not physically possible. His cellular absorption rates are working just fine, thanks, Greg said, wiping his mouth. Ready for the next round. The strength tests proved equally baffling. What started as standard weightlifting quickly evolved into scenarios that defied their understanding of human biomechanics. He's adapting to each increase in resistance, Pixel observed, their colors shifting through shades of amazement. Not just physically, he's learning the most efficient way to apply force with each attempt. The human concept of technique, Lumi suggested, her appendages pulsing thoughtfully. They compensate for their physical limitations through behavioral adaptation. Limitations? Azurix questioned, watching as Greg figured out how to leverage his body weight to move loads they'd calculated should be impossible for his muscle mass. I'm starting to think we fundamentally misunderstand that word. Then came the problem-solving trials. They presented Greg with increasingly complex challenges, expecting to find the boundary between human determination and physical capability. Instead, they found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. Subject has been attempting to solve the quantum spatial puzzle for 3 hours, Director Sparkforge noted, his surface showing patterns of concern. Blood glucose levels are dropping, cognitive strain indicators are elevated, and yet, almost got it, Greg muttered, fingers moving through the holographic puzzle with stubborn determination. It's like a Rubik's Cube crossed with a crossword puzzle in 4 dimensions, right? The research team exchanged worried looks. That was exactly what it was, but no species had ever made that connection without extensive quantum mechanics training. Dr. Bloom, Nova called out, her scales shifting to warning orange. His endorphin levels are rising again, like during the strength tests. He's enjoying this, Lumi realized, her appendages glowing with sudden understanding. The harder the challenge becomes, the more satisfaction he derives from attempting it. The day's final test involved reaction speeds. They expected fatigue to have set in after hours of testing. Instead, Greg seemed more energized than ever. This is like that game at the arcade, he said, dodging holographic projectiles while maintaining a conversation. You know, we have something similar on Earth called bullet hell games. Nova's scales went pale. Your species simulates combat scenarios for entertainment. Oh yeah, loads of them. Great for hand-eye coordination. Speaking of which, you might want to increase the speed on these. Getting a bit predictable. Director Sparkforge's surface showed clear patterns of frustration. We need to reconvene. These results make no sense. Every time we think we've found a limit, he treats it like a suggestion. Perhaps we're approaching this wrong, Azurix suggested, all 4 arms gesturing expansively. We're testing for breaking points, but humans don't seem to operate on that principle. They don't stop at their limits. They treat them as checkpoints. The team watched as Greg completed the reaction course with better scores than his first attempt, despite having been active for over 12 hours. How are you still functioning? Pixel asked through the cum, their chromatophores pulsing with genuine curiosity. Greg shrugged, taking another impossibly large drink of water. Honestly, this is pretty much like training for a marathon, except with more aliens and quantum physics. Hey, any chance we could try those gravity tests again? I think I figured out a better running form for it. Nova's scales shifted to emergency red. Absolutely not. We've already exceeded safe parameters for parameters which clearly don't apply to humans, Lumi interrupted, her appendages glowing with scientific fervor. Every data point we've collected today contradicts our previous models of biological capability. Precisely why we need to stop, Director Sparkforge insisted. His surface showing patterns of administrative authority. We need to analyze these results before ... before what? Greg asked, still casually jogging in place. Before you realize that everything you think is impossible just means you haven't figured out how to do it yet. The research team fell silent, staring at their test subject who had just casually summarized what might be the fundamental principle of human existence. Azurix's secondary voice box made a sound that, in her species, passed for laughter. Well, Director, I believe our subject just volunteered for more tests. Shall we see what other impossible things humans do before breakfast? None of them realized they were about to find out exactly what happened when human determination met alien scientific curiosity, and none of them were prepared for what came next. The warning sirens started at exactly 3:47 p.m. facility time. Dr. Nix Solara's neural crown lit up with dozens of emergency notifications simultaneously as the testing chamber's containment fields began to fluctuate. Status report, Director Sparkforge demanded, his crystalline surface flickering with alarm patterns. Power surge in the quantum probability generator, Lumi reported, her appendages glowing emergency red. The system is trying to compensate for Greg's latest test results by recalculating fundamental laws of physics. On the testing chamber floor, Ryan Carter continued his assigned task, seemingly unaware that he was causing a mathematical crisis in the facility's mainframe. The challenge had seemed simple enough: complete an obstacle course, while the system gradually increased environmental difficulty. He's breaking causality, Pixel announced, their chromatophores cycling through warning colors. His success rate is exceeding the probability calculations faster than the system can generate new parameters. Nova's scales bristled with alarm. In normal speech, please, he's doing so well that the computer thinks he's cheating at reality, Pixel shrieked. Through the observation window, they watched as Greg vaulted over a quantum barrier, rolled under a temporal distortion field, and somehow managed to complete a puzzle sequence faster than the computer could generate the solutions. Shut it down, Director Sparkforge ordered, his surface showing patterns of maximum concern. Abort the sequence. Azurix's four hands flew over the control panels. Systems not responding. The probability engine is locked in a feedback loop trying to calculate how he's doing this. The chamber's reality stabilizers began to spark. Greg finally noticed something was wrong when the gravity started fluctuating wildly. Guys, is this part of the test? Emergency protocols, Nova barked, her scales now glowing bright enough to light the room. Get him out of there. Teleporters are offline, Lumi reported, her appendages whipping frantically across multiple control surfaces. The quantum uncertainty levels are too high for accurate transport. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Reality distortion warnings flashed across every screen. The probability engine's processing core began to overheat, sending cascading failures through the facility's systems. That's when Ryan Carter did something that would be recorded in the annals of galactic scientific history. He stopped trying to complete the test and started trying to solve the problem. Your computer is stuck in a logic loop, right? He called out, voice steady despite the chaos around him. Because I'm getting results it thinks are impossible. Correct, Azurix confirmed. All four arms still trying to override the system. It's causing a cascade failure in the probability calculations. Greg nodded, then did something completely unexpected. He started failing, deliberately, spectacularly, missing jumps he'd made easily before. Stumbling over obstacles he'd mastered hours ago. What is he doing? Director Sparkforge demanded, his surface showing patterns of total confusion. He's giving the system predictable data, Pixel realized, their color shifting to understanding blue. Results that fit within normal probability curves. The warning signals began to decrease. The reality distortion started to stabilize. The probability engine's overload warnings dropped from critical to merely concerning, but they weren't out of danger yet. The chamber's environmental controls were still malfunctioning, cycling randomly through extreme conditions. Heat, cold, pressure changes, gravity fluctuations. It was a deadly cocktail of environmental hazards. "We have to get him out of there," Nova insisted, her scales pulsing with genuine worry for their test subject's safety. "The emergency doors are sealed," Lumi reported. "The safety protocols are still in effect." They watched in horror as the chamber filled with what humans called snow, then instantly switched to desert conditions, then began to simulate crushing ocean depths. Greg's voice came through the surprisingly calm. "Hey, quick question. The containment field gets its power from those glowing panels on the ceiling, right?" "Correct, but they're rated for impacts up to," Azaric started to explain, then stopped as she realized what he was planning. "No, that's impossible. The force required to." Greg was already moving. Using debris from the malfunctioning obstacle course, he constructed a makeshift ramp. Despite the chaotic environmental changes, despite the laws of physics being slightly questionable in the chamber, despite every probability calculation saying he would fail, he began his run-up. "The human is going to attempt to manually deactivate a quantum containment field," Director Sparkforge announced, his surface showing patterns that could only be described as horrified fascination. "The human has a name," Greg called out as he reached the ramp. "And he's about to do something really stupid." What followed defied every safety protocol, every physical limitation, and several laws of motion. Ryan Carter sprinted up the ramp, launched himself into the air through fluctuating gravity fields, and somehow through what Azaric would later describe in a report as sheer human audacity, managed to kick out the main power coupling for the containment system. The field collapsed, the probability engine reset, the environmental controls defaulted to safe modes, and Ryan Carter landed in a roll that would have made any professional acrobat jealous. He stood up, brushed some residual snow off his shoulders, and gave them a thumbs up through the observation window. "So, does this mean we're done with testing for today?" The research team stared in stunned silence. Nova's scales had gone completely white. Pixel had frozen in a shade of disbelief purple. Director Sparkforge's surface showed patterns that hadn't been seen in their species for generations. "Done with testing," Azaric's secondary voice box made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Ryan Carter, I don't think we've even begun to understand what we're testing." The post-incident debriefing room buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with its quantum-powered lighting. Ryan Carter sat at a table designed for beings with vastly different anatomies, sipping something that was almost, but not quite, entirely unlike coffee. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Director Sparkforge began, his crystalline surface showing patterns of deep contemplation. "When faced with a potentially catastrophic system failure, you deliberately chose to perform worse at your assigned tasks." "Well, yeah," Greg shrugged. "Sometimes you have to take a step backward to move forward. Like when you're training for a marathon, if you push too hard too fast, you'll just hurt yourself." Dr. Nix Solara's neural crown sparkled as she processed this concept. "But then you immediately proceeded to attempt something with an even lower probability of success." "Had to," Greg replied, taking another sip of his pseudo-coffee. "The first part was about helping your computer chill out. The second part was about getting out of a bad situation. Different problems, different solutions." Professor Lumi's appendages twisted in confusion. "But our probability calculations indicated both actions should have been impossible." Greg laughed. "Here's the thing about impossible. It's usually just a word people use when they haven't figured out how to do something yet. Most of human history is just a long list of impossible things we decided to do anyway, like running 42 kilometers for fun." Pixel asked, their chromatophores shifting to a curious blue. "Exactly. The first marathon runner actually died doing it. Now, we have people running multiple marathons back-to-back through deserts, Humans are really good at looking at boundaries and treating them like suggestions. Nova's scales rippled with realization. Is that why our testing parameters kept failing? Because we were trying to find your limits? Limits are weird for humans, Greg explained, leaning back in his multimorphic chair. Tell us something's impossible, and we take it as a challenge. Tell us we can't do something, and somebody is going to try it just to prove you wrong. Pretty sure that's how we figured out hot peppers were edible. Director Sparkforge's surface showed patterns of dawning comprehension. Your species doesn't operate on probability. You function on possibility. Now you're getting it, Greg beamed. It's not about what the numbers say we can do. It's about what we think we might be able to do if we try hard enough. Sometimes we fail spectacularly, but sometimes he gestured around at the alien research facility. Sometimes we end up having coffee with aliens. Azurix's hands moved in excited gestures as she spoke. This completely changes our understanding of species classification. We've been categorizing based on capabilities when we should have been measuring potential. The human approach to impossibility requires a completely new scientific framework, Lumi added, her appendages glowing with academic excitement. Here's what I don't get, Greg said, finishing his drink. You folks have incredible technology, vast knowledge of the universe, and actual functioning teleporters. How come you let probability calculations tell you what you can't do? The research team exchanged glances. Nova's scales shifted through thoughtful colors. Pixel's chromatophores pulsed with consideration. Even Director Sparkforge's surface showed patterns of deep reflection. Perhaps, Azurix said slowly, her secondary voice box humming with wonder, we have been approaching the entire concept of research and advancement from the wrong direction. We've been asking what is possible when we should have been asking what could be possible. Greg grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. So what impossible thing do you want to try first? The room filled with the alien equivalent of laughter as the team realized that their attempt to study human capabilities had instead taught them something fundamental about their own potential. They had set out to understand human limitations and instead discovered that perhaps the only real limitation was believing in them in the first place. Galactic Research Institute. Official database update. Priority level, immediate. Classification status revised. Species, human Homo sapiens. Previous classification, improbable anomaly. New classification, probability optional persistent achievers. POPA note from lead researcher, Dr. Nick Solara. Following extensive testing and one thoroughly destroyed probability engine, we have been forced to create an entirely new classification category for humans. Their ability to casually ignore mathematical impossibilities while maintaining a remarkably cheerful attitude requires a complete revision of our understanding of biological potential. Addendum from Security Officer Kale Iridium. Recommendation to install probability-resistant containment fields in all facilities where humans might visit. Also, a request to remove impossible from our security protocol descriptions, as it apparently just encouraged them. Final observation from test subject Ryan Carter. Thanks for the workout. Though next time, maybe we could skip the reality-breaking physics and just go for a run. I know this great trail back on Earth, only about 100 kilometers through the mountains. Perfect for a light jog. Status of research project officially concluded. Though several staff members have started training for something they're calling an ultramarathon, Director Sparkforge has expressed concern that human impossibility might be contagious. End report. P.S. Ryan Carter's coffee rating for our artificial beverage simulator not bad, but it could use more impossible physics-defying properties. Maybe try adding something called espresso.